Okay, so this is my final project for Dr. McClurkin's class. This is my Dr. McClurkin style rant. I'm titling it Film Roundup, and this is about an analysis of this semester's movies using my peers as primary sources for how we felt about the movie and how we really absorbed it. So I'm going to be using all my sources that I'm citing are going to be the wiki posts, and I think this is just the best way to kind of put across, like, from the knowledge of like a Gen Z zillennial person, how I and my classmates really took these movies, because we were all pretty accurate, or not pretty accurate, but we were all really similar in how we thought about it. So of the 6 war movies, I'm gonna go from worst to best. So the absolute worst inaccuracy was Gone with the Wind, 1939. I'm not gonna shy away from this. I hate this movie so much. Oh my gosh, I can't believe this is the most viewed movie ever. I maintain that it is a 2 out of 10 for me. And I find this movie to be so inaccurate about the Civil War. It's not funny. It made a mockery of African Americans, both enslaved and then freed later on. It wasn't even that. It wasn't just like it didn't portray them, or it was whatever. It just made them all seem dumb and like stupid. I just hated it. Like, it was awful, and it really showcased, that was a part that really showed me, like, this was made in the 30s where everyone was racist still. It also, it showcased the antebellum South as this beautiful, wonderful place that we should look up to, but like, did that even exist? Like, I'm sure there was good aspects of like pre-war South, like there's a lot of wealth, prosperity, and everything for white people, remember, but I just feel like they really romanticizing it. And my classmate Maris, she made a great point about this, so I'm going to quote some of her work here. Quote, "This movie works very poorly as a secondary source about the Civil War, the antebellum South, and slavery. The film portrays heavily into the lost cause myth of the war, imagining the tragedy of the war being the loss of a whole civilization. As a result, the antebellum South is romanticized, ignoring or dismissing the fact that this supposed wonderful civilization was built on slave labor." End quote. So yeah, like it just, I don't think the antebellum South really existed like that. So as I said before, this movie is much better at depicting what people were thinking about in the 30s than than how it was during the Civil War. The next movie is Last of the Mohicans. Now, the next couple of movies are really on par with each other, so everything's kind of mid at this point. The Last of the Mohicans is a 90s blockbuster about the French and Indian War. It features a well-known cast that was sure to draw in viewers, not necessarily for the historical context, if you get what I mean. Daniel Day-Lewis was in it, and he was like hot apparently, so I don't think a lot of people were watching it because they're like, oh, the French and Indian War. So this wasn't the worst for historical accuracy, though. We do get to see a lot more Native American interplay there than Pocahontas, which is another movie we watched this semester. So there was some accuracies there, which is great, but it did fall prey to white knight syndrome. And what Sophie said is, quote, "As a secondary source, it's okay. There are some accurate parts in the film that would have occurred during this time, but it was very much dramatized and focused more on the white story than the native story," end quote. I agree with Sophie wholeheartedly there. This movie was about entertainment and entertainment alone. I don't think it's meant to educate viewers or really evoke an emotional response. I would say it's mid-tier for accuracy, and it didn't really, just like the movie previous, Gone with the Wind, this movie didn't really tell us anything about the Civil War or the French and Indian War, respectively. It was more about the personal stuff, which is fine. But I mean, if the movie's about the war, maybe tell us about the war. Just a thought. Next is The Patriot, 2000. Again, this is a Revolutionary War film. It's very similar in feel to Last of the Mohicans. It's made just a few years later. It also featured an, all-star cast with, another hot dude, I guess. And it was pretty mid. A huge difference was that it did have a lot of accuracy in certain things, like costume, set design, a lot of like societal norm stuff when it comes to like the white people, like a lot of like their, you know, court behaviors, things like that. That was all very accurate. And like coming from my background of working for the Columbia Williamsburg Foundation, like I found that to be extremely interesting that all of that was so accurate versus like the treatment of enslaved life was just kind of like pushed down, you know, like at least they weren't made a mockery of, but it also just there wasn't much said about them, and it was a lot of like almost positive stuff where like the protagonist was very like nice to enslaved people, and like that just wasn't accurate. Like there is no good and bad masters. These are people who are all owning human beings. A great point from Jean was the treatment of enslaved people in this movie was sort of glossed over and mostly promoted the idea that war immediately improved their lives and that there were those who are good guys, end quote. Again, I will say this talked more about the Revolutionary War. There's so many wars going on right now in my head. But it did talk more about the Revolutionary War, which I thought, you know, it did provide more historical context, which is cool, but it really lacked from the fact that they just paid attention to detail to just like clothes and set design. So I would say this is a strong middle of the pack. Number 4 in the lineup is Glory, 1989, which is a different perspective of the Civil War. This is the Union side, and I think this movie is so much better than the idea, like, than what Gone with the Wind was. This was so much more accurate, and I especially love, like, how the relationship between African Americans and white Americans were depicted, because it showed that the Union soldiers were still racist, even though they were fighting to end slavery, which a lot of people don't know. And that was just really like, for me, I was like, thank you. Like I said this a lot in class during the semester, but it was like, these people were not like heroes, they were not like gods, like they were fighting to end slavery, but they were all still racist. So I just, like, we still, like, as a society had so much more to work towards when it came to like civil rights and stuff, and like people vilifying or like, you know, vinifying the Union. I'm like, oh, there's still a lot of problems, and we still have a lot of problems today, but it's getting better. And Sasha backed me up on this by saying, quote, one thing this movie portrayed well was the relationship between black and white soldiers at the time, and especially the fact that white soldiers did not take black soldiers seriously and use them for labor instead of combat. End quote. Completely, again, agree. Like, it just really, that was accurate, but it did suffer from like movie dramatization and like some scenes that were kind of changed around that weren't completely accurate. But I would say this is so much better. Glory, give it a solid 7 out of 10 for accuracy. My second place winner for most accurate was Born on the 4th of July, 1989. Born on the 4th of July is a heartbreaking movie about Vietnam. This is my second place. It's incredibly more accurate because it's based on the real life of Ron Kovic, and he was completely involved in, you know, the making of the movie. It did suffer from being made 15 to 20 years after the war, and just from regular movie dramatization, you know, it did have a really famous lead. And while that didn't really affect me, I bet a lot of, like a lot of my classmates and even other people watching probably were really affected by the fact that it had this like heartthrob as the lead. But I think that also kind of added to the all-American boy that Ron Kovic was before the war. This movie, like, this told you a lot about Vietnam, but it told you more about the after effects. I cried so much watching this movie. This had like evoked so much emotional reaction, and it really told you about it. Sarah, my classmate, quote, I think that this film shows the memory and impacts of the people who experienced the Vietnam War. This film was made about 15 years post-Vietnam when the thoughts had changed and settled, end quote. So like she comments on that fact too, is that, you know, I think a little bit of the accuracy in like the scene where he goes and talks with the family of the boy he killed, like that never really happened, but he just thought about it. So, you know, that's inaccurate, but it doesn't take away from any like truth. So this movie is a good second. It was like a terrible movie to watch because of how emotionally like devastating it was, but it was a great movie. because of that, if that makes sense. The winner of this is The Best Years of Our Lives, 1946. Ding, ding, ding. This right here is the most accurate movie. The Best Years of My Life was made immediately after World War II, and it's stunningly accurate. I loved this movie. I adored this movie. It was the best movie we watched this semester. In my opinion, it was entertaining, hard-hitting, accurate, emotional, like everything. It's both a primary and secondary source, and honestly a gem in film history. Like, I don't think we'll ever have a movie made like directly a year after the war ended by actual war veterans. And I think that this is like the best movie ever, in my opinion. If you're wanting historical accuracy and entertainment and everything wrapped in one. As my classmate Olivia Foster said, quote, "This movie is unique in comparison to other movies we have watched in this class since it was made during the time period that it was being depicted. This film is able to accurately work as both a primary and secondary source of the time period," end quote. This movie is the winner. This is the most accurate movie of all the war movies we watched, and of actually all the movies we watched. Like, if we were going to go like through the 12 that we did, this is it. This wins of the 6 war movies and of every movie. It's just, this movie is a gem, and it's beautiful. So, and it showcases that everything about the life of the war and the life after war, this is a pinnacle in cinematography, in my opinion. This has been my rant, and thank you for the great semester.